In the pre-dawn darkness of December 17, 1944, Sergeant Takeshi Yamamoto crouched inside his Type 97 Chiha medium tank, positioned along a muddy ridge overlooking the Philippine Valley below. The 32-year-old tank commander had spent the previous evening briefing his crew with absolute confidence. American armor was heavy, slow, and cumbersome. Their Sherman tanks wallowed like pregnant water buffalo, easy targets for disciplined Japanese crews who understood the art of patient, defensive warfare. The Imperial Army's intelligence reports had been consistent for months. American tanks prioritized armor over mobility, creating sluggish machines that Japanese forces could outmaneuver and destroy from prepared positions. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sergeant Yamamoto checked his watch. 0500 hours. Dawn would break in 40 minutes, and according to reconnaissance, the American column would lumber into the valley sometime after sunrise. His crew was ready. They had rehearsed their firing positions, calculated ranges to probable approach routes, and prepared fallback positions should the initial ambush require tactical withdrawal. Everything aligned with their training. Everything made tactical sense. Then he heard it. Not the grinding, laboring sound of heavy Sherman tanks struggling through muddy terrain, but something else entirely. A high-pitched mechanical whine, growing louder with impossible speed. Yamamoto pressed his eye to the periscope, squinting into the gray pre-dawn light. What emerged from the morning mist made his breath catch in his throat. American armored vehicles were racing across the valley floor at speeds he had been told were impossible for tracked vehicles. They weren't advancing cautiously. They weren't probing for defensive positions. They were sprinting, their low silhouettes barely visible against the terrain, moving faster than any tank he had ever seen. His gunner, Corporal Hideaki Sato, voiced what they were all thinking. "Commander, those cannot be tanks. Tanks do not move like that." But they were tanks. Or rather, tank destroyers. The M18 Hellcat, a machine that contradicted everything Japanese armor doctrine had promised about American tactical limitations. Before Yamamoto could issue firing orders, 3 of these strange vehicles had already flanked his position, appearing on his left where no armored vehicle should have been able to traverse the broken ground. His carefully prepared ambush had been rendered obsolete in less than 90 seconds. The lead Hellcat pivoted with startling agility, its long 76mm gun swinging toward Yamamoto's position with mechanical precision. He shouted for his driver to reverse, to execute the tactical withdrawal they had rehearsed. But the Type 97's diesel engine, already straining, could not match the retreat speed necessary to escape. The American vehicle fired once. The armor-piercing round struck the Chiha's turret ring with devastating accuracy. Yamamoto's world became fire, smoke, and the screaming of injured men. He regained consciousness outside his destroyed tank, dragged clear by his driver before the ammunition stores detonated. American soldiers surrounded them, weapons ready but not firing. A young lieutenant approached, offering water from a canteen. Through the ringing in his ears, Yamamoto heard words in broken Japanese. "You fought well. Your crew will receive medical treatment." The American gestured toward a field dressing station visible behind their lines. "We respect courage, even in our enemies." Sergeant Yamamoto stared at the smoking wreckage of his command, at the crater where his carefully prepared position had been, at the 3 M18 Hellcats now racing toward the next objective with the same impossible speed that had overwhelmed his ambush. In that moment, every tactical briefing he had received, every intelligence assessment about American armor limitations, every confident prediction about Japanese defensive superiority crumbled like ash. His journal entry that night, written with his left hand because his right arm hung in a sling, contained only 7 words. "They lied to us about everything important." The confrontation in the Philippine valleys of late 1944 represented far more than tactical defeats. It marked the collision between carefully constructed doctrine and brutal mechanical reality. For 3 years, Japanese tank crews had operated under comprehensive indoctrination about the nature of American armored warfare. This indoctrination was not accidental propaganda, but a systematic program designed to maintain morale despite growing material disadvantages. Imperial Japanese Army tactical manuals from 1942 through 1944 consistently characterized American tank doctrine as fundamentally flawed. According to these official documents, American forces prioritized heavy armor and large-caliber guns at the expense of mobility and tactical flexibility. The manuals described American tank crews as poorly trained, reliant on material superiority rather than skill, and psychologically dependent on overwhelming firepower because they lacked the spiritual discipline of Japanese warriors. These assessments came from the highest levels of military planning, distributed to tank units throughout the Pacific and Asian theaters as authoritative analysis. Training programs for Japanese armor crews reinforced these beliefs through repetitive instruction. Captain Hiroshi Nakamura, commander of the 3rd Tank Company stationed in Luzon, described the indoctrination process in his post-war memoir. "We spent 6 weeks at the armor school in Manchuria learning American tank tactics. Our instructors used captured intelligence reports and combat footage to demonstrate American tactical rigidity. They showed us Sherman tanks advancing in predictable formations, following doctrinal approaches that Japanese crews could exploit through superior tactical awareness. We were taught that American tanks would always choose direct approaches, that their crews would never risk their expensive machines in aggressive maneuvers, that their commanders lacked the flexibility to adapt when initial plans failed." This tactical instruction merged with broader cultural conditioning about American military character. Japanese tank crews were told that American soldiers, drawn from a soft civilian society obsessed with material comfort, would never endure the hardships that Japanese warriors accepted as natural. The very abundance that made American armies materially superior was presented as a spiritual weakness. Men who required hot meals, regular rest, and comfortable accommodations could never match the determination of soldiers willing to endure any privation for the emperor. The Type 97 Chiha medium tank, which formed the backbone of Japanese armor forces in the Philippines, embodied this philosophy. Designed in 1937, the Chiha prioritized mechanical simplicity and ease of maintenance over armor protection or firepower. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Its 57mm main gun and thin armor, barely adequate against early war Allied tanks, reflected Japanese doctrine that emphasized infantry support over tank versus tank combat. Tank crews were taught that their primary mission was supporting infantry operations, not engaging enemy armor. When forced into anti-tank roles, they would rely on superior positioning, crew discipline, and tactical patience to overcome material disadvantages. Lieutenant Kenji Watanabe, a platoon leader in the 7th Tank Regiment, described this doctrinal emphasis in a letter to his brother written in November 1944. "Our strength lies not in the thickness of our armor but in the superiority of our tactics. American tanks may carry heavier guns and thicker plates, but these advantages mean nothing against crews who understand terrain, timing, and the warrior's spirit. We have studied their predictable methods. When they advance along obvious routes, we will be waiting in prepared positions. Their slow, methodical approach gives us every advantage. Victory belongs to those who strike from unexpected angles, not those who rely on brute force." This confidence was reinforced by early war successes. During the Malayan Campaign and the invasion of the Philippines in 1941 and 1942, Japanese armor had performed effectively against surprised and outnumbered Allied forces. These victories became proof that Japanese tactical doctrine was superior to Western approaches. The fact that these successes came against unprepared opponents with obsolete equipment was conveniently overlooked in the triumphalist narratives that circulated through Japanese military education. By late 1944, however, the tactical situation had transformed completely. American industrial capacity had produced new generations of armored vehicles specifically designed for the Pacific Theater's unique challenges. The M18 Hellcat tank destroyer represented everything Japanese intelligence had insisted was impossible. It combined the firepower of much heavier vehicles with speed that exceeded even light reconnaissance tanks. Its top speed of 55 miles per hour on roads and its ability to maintain 35 miles per hour across rough terrain shattered every assumption about the relationship between armor, firepower, and mobility. Japanese intelligence officers had received reports about these new American vehicles but dismissed them as exaggerations or propaganda. Captain Takeshi Kimura, an intelligence analyst attached to the 14th Area Army Headquarters in Manila, later admitted his catastrophic misjudgment. "We received prisoner interrogation reports describing American tank destroyers that could sprint across open ground faster than our reconnaissance vehicles. These reports contradicted our fundamental understanding of armored vehicle design. Heavy guns required heavy chassis. Speed required light armor. No vehicle could combine maximum firepower with maximum mobility without unacceptable compromises. We concluded the reports were either deliberate American misinformation or the confused observations of frightened prisoners exaggerating enemy capabilities. We literally could not believe such a machine was possible, so we convinced ourselves it was not real." This systematic dismissal of contrary evidence reflected a deeper problem in Japanese military intelligence. By 1944, the Imperial Army's intelligence apparatus had become isolated from reliable information about American industrial and technological capabilities. Intercepts of American communications were limited. Prisoner interrogations were filtered through interpreters who often told superior officers what they wanted to hear rather than accurate translations. Technical intelligence from captured equipment focused on current deployed systems rather than emerging technologies. The result was an intelligence picture frozen in 1942, failing to account for the rapid evolution of American military equipment. The cultural dimension of this intelligence failure proved equally significant. Japanese military culture strongly discouraged junior officers from contradicting senior assessments. When field reports from the Philippines began describing encounters with extremely fast American armored vehicles, staff officers in Manila and Tokyo dismissed these accounts rather than revise their understanding. To acknowledge that American industry had solved the firepower mobility equation would require admitting that previous intelligence assessments had been fundamentally wrong. Such admissions challenged institutional credibility and individual careers. It was easier to reject troubling new information than to accept its implications. For Japanese tank crews, the consequences of these intelligence failures would prove devastating. They entered combat in late 1944 with tactical plans based on enemy capabilities that no longer existed, fighting an opponent they had been systematically taught to underestimate in precisely the areas where American advantages were now overwhelming. The psychological impact of discovering this deception, of realizing that careful preparation had been built on false foundations, would create a crisis of confidence that no amount of courage or determination could overcome. Sergeant Yamamoto's experience represented just the first of hundreds of similar encounters. As American forces pressed their offensive across the Philippines through December 1944 and into early 1945, Japanese tank crews repeatedly discovered that everything they had been taught about American armor doctrine was catastrophically wrong. The M18 Hellcats did not advance cautiously along predictable routes. They did not require extensive preparation before attacking. They did not prioritize force protection over aggressive maneuver. Instead, they exploited their extraordinary speed to appear where Japanese defenses were weakest, strike with devastating firepower, then withdraw before defensive fires could be coordinated. Corporal Hideaki Sato, Yamamoto's gunner who survived the initial ambush, described the psychological impact of subsequent encounters in his diary. "We prepared new positions, deeper in the hills where terrain would limit American mobility advantages. Command assured us that in close terrain, among dense vegetation and steep slopes, the American vehicles would lose their speed advantage. Our Type 97s, designed for infantry support in varied terrain, would perform better in these conditions." This assessment proved as false as all previous predictions. The American crews demonstrated skill and aggression that our instructors said soft Western soldiers could never possess. They maneuvered through terrain we considered impassable for tracked vehicles. They coordinated with infantry and artillery with a precision that contradicted every claim about American tactical rigidity. Most disturbing was their willingness to accept risk, to push damaged vehicles forward rather than withdraw to safety. These were not the cautious, comfort-seeking soldiers we expected. They fought with a determination and tactical flexibility that matched or exceeded our own. The speed differential between the M18 Hellcat and the Type 97 Chiha created tactical situations that Japanese doctrine had never contemplated. The Chiha's maximum road speed of 24 miles per hour and cross-country speed of roughly 15 miles per hour had been adequate when facing British and early American tanks with similar performance. Against the Hellcat's 55-mile-per-hour road speed and 35-mile-per-hour off-road capability, every tactical advantage that Japanese crews had relied upon evaporated. Prepared positions could be flanked before guns could traverse. Tactical withdrawals became routes as American vehicles closed distances faster than Japanese tanks could retreat. Ambushes failed because the time required to acquire and engage targets exceeded the time American vehicles needed to pass through kill zones. Lieutenant Masao Tanaka, who commanded a platoon of Type 97s during the fighting around Clark Field, described attempting to execute a textbook ambush against an American column. We positioned 3 tanks in hull-down positions overlooking the approach road, with clear fields of fire extending 800 meters. According to doctrine, we would allow the American column to enter our kill zone, destroy the lead vehicles to create a roadblock, then systematically eliminate the trapped vehicles. This was precisely the scenario our training had prepared us to execute. What happened instead resembled nothing we had practiced. The American vehicles did not proceed along the road in column formation. They dispersed across a wide front, advancing through terrain our intelligence maps marked as impassable for armored vehicles. By the time we identified primary targets and prepared to fire, they had already closed to 300 meters from 3 different directions. 2 of my tanks were destroyed before we fired a single shot. The 3rd tank, my own, managed one round that struck an American vehicle but failed to penetrate. Their return fire was immediate and devastatingly accurate. We abandoned our position and retreated on foot. The entire engagement lasted perhaps 4 minutes. All our preparation, all our careful positioning, rendered irrelevant by an enemy who simply refused to fight the way we expected. The accumulation of these tactical disasters created a profound crisis among Japanese tank crews. Each engagement provided fresh evidence that their training had been systematically misleading. The psychological impact extended beyond tactical frustration to fundamental questions about institutional trustworthiness. If intelligence assessments about American armor capabilities were this catastrophically wrong, what other assurances from command were equally false? Staff Sergeant Ichiro Kobayashi, a veteran tank commander with experience dating back to the China campaigns, recorded his growing disillusionment in letters to his wife that were later recovered from his personal effects. We have lost 17 tanks in our regiment during the past month. Not to superior American numbers, though they have numerical advantage. Not to better crew training, though their gunners demonstrate remarkable accuracy. We lose because every tactical principle we were taught has proven false. The Americans do not fight the way we were told they would fight. Their machines perform in ways we were assured were impossible. When I reported these observations to battalion headquarters, requesting updated intelligence assessments and revised tactical guidance, I was told that my concerns reflected insufficient warrior spirit rather than legitimate tactical problems. How can we adapt to battlefield realities when command refuses to acknowledge those realities exist? The experience of captured Japanese tank crews provided the most detailed documentation of this psychological transformation. Unlike infantry soldiers who might spend days or weeks in field hospitals before interrogation, tank crews captured during engagements were often brought immediately to prisoner collection points where American intelligence officers conducted detailed tactical debriefings. These interrogations, preserved in military archives, reveal a consistent pattern of shock, disbelief, and growing awareness of systematic deception. Corporal Yoshi Nakamura, captured after his Type 97 was disabled near San Fernando in January 1945, described his first extended conversation with American armor officers. They showed me technical specifications for the M18 Hellcat. I initially refused to believe the performance figures. A vehicle mounting a 76mm gun capable of traveling 55 miles per hour contradicted everything I understood about engineering constraints. The American captain, speaking through an interpreter, asked me to calculate the power-to-weight ratio based on the specifications. When I completed the mathematics, I realized the figures were plausible. The Americans had simply prioritized different design parameters than Japanese engineers. They sacrificed armor protection to maximize speed and firepower. This was not impossible engineering. It was a different philosophy of armored warfare, one that our intelligence services had either failed to understand or deliberately concealed from us. The technical specifications themselves became a form of psychological evidence. When confronted with documented performance capabilities, Japanese tank crews could no longer dismiss battlefield observations as combat confusion or exaggeration. The M18 Hellcat specifications were irrefutable. Its Continental R975 radial engine produced 450 horsepower, driving a vehicle that weighed only 17.7 tons when combat loaded, creating a power-to-weight ratio of 25.4 horsepower per ton. By comparison, the Type 97 Chiha's 170 horsepower diesel engine struggled to move a vehicle weighing 15 tons, producing a power-to-weight ratio of only 11.3 horsepower per ton. This mathematical reality explained everything Japanese crews had witnessed in combat. Lieutenant Takeshi Yamamoto, a technical officer responsible for tank maintenance in the 2nd Armored Division, described his reaction to examining a captured M18 Hellcat in detail. American guards permitted me to inspect one of their damaged vehicles awaiting repair. What I observed contradicted years of engineering education. The vehicle's suspension system used torsion bars rather than the leaf springs common in Japanese designs, providing superior cross-country performance. The turret rotation mechanism was powered rather than manual, allowing rapid target acquisition. Most remarkably, the entire vehicle was designed for rapid field maintenance. Components could be accessed and replaced quickly, minimizing mechanical downtime. Our Type 97 tanks required extensive disassembly for routine maintenance, often keeping vehicles out of action for days. The American vehicle reflected a completely different maintenance philosophy, one that recognized battlefield repairs would be performed by crews with limited tools and time. This single vehicle taught me more about American industrial thinking than years of intelligence briefings. The contrast in maintenance requirements became particularly significant as the Philippine campaign progressed. American armored units maintained high operational readiness rates despite intensive combat and difficult terrain. Japanese tank units, plagued by mechanical failures and lacking spare parts, saw their effective strength decline not primarily through combat losses but through mechanical attrition. Sergeant Kenji Watanabe described this disparity in his memoir. By February 1945, our company had 7 Type 97 tanks on paper. Only 2 remained mechanically functional. The others sat immobilized with various mechanical failures we lacked parts to repair. Meanwhile, American armored units we observed maintained consistent vehicle availability despite fighting continuously. Their supply system delivered spare parts, replacement engines, even entire replacement vehicles with a regularity that seemed impossible given the distances involved. We learned that American tank destroyers used the same engine as their Sherman tanks, creating parts commonality across their armored force. Japanese armor used different engines in nearly every vehicle type, complicating logistics and limiting parts availability. This seemingly minor technical decision had profound operational consequences. Food became another dimension of evidence that Japanese expectations differed dramatically from American reality. Captured tank crews received rations that exceeded anything they had experienced during their military service. The psychological impact of this abundance operated on multiple levels, simultaneously demonstrating American material superiority and revealing the extent of Japanese privation. Corporal Hideaki Sato, Sergeant Yamamoto's gunner mentioned earlier, described his first meal in American custody. They provided canned meat, white bread, coffee with condensed milk and sugar, canned fruit, and chocolate bars. I assumed this was a special meal, perhaps intended to make us compliant during interrogation. When I asked the guard through an interpreter when we would receive our actual rations, he appeared confused. He explained this was standard daily allocation for prisoners of war, identical to what American soldiers received. I could not process this information. Our tank crews had subsisted on rice, occasional dried fish, and whatever vegetables we could obtain locally. Fresh meat was rare. White bread was a luxury we had not seen in months. The idea that common soldiers received such provisions daily seemed absurd. Yet over subsequent days, the meals remained consistent. We were eating better as prisoners than we had as active-duty tank commanders in the Imperial Army. The caloric difference was substantial and medically significant. American military rations provided approximately 3,600 to 3,800 calories daily. Japanese tank crews in the Philippines by late 1944 were receiving perhaps 1,400 to 1,600 calories daily when supply lines functioned normally, often less during periods of disruption. Medical records from prisoner processing centers documented that captured Japanese armor personnel gained an average of 14 pounds during their first 6 weeks in custody, clear physical evidence of the nutritional disparity between the two forces. Lieutenant Masao Tanaka described the psychological impact of this physical transformation. After 2 months in American custody, I barely recognized my own reflection. My face had filled out. The constant gnawing hunger that had become normal simply disappeared. Most disturbing was the realization that we had normalized our own starvation. We believed everyone fighting this war faced similar privation, that scarcity was an inevitable consequence of total war. Discovering that American soldiers ate abundantly while we starved revealed a truth about relative national capacity that no amount of propaganda could obscure. You cannot sustain modern armored warfare when your tank crews are malnourished. The Americans understood this. Our leadership either did not or chose logistics approaches that made adequate nutrition impossible. The medical care provided to wounded Japanese tank crews created similar moments of recognition. Staff Sergeant Ichiro Kobayashi, severely burned when his tank was hit by a Hellcat 76mm round, received treatment that contradicted everything he expected. I anticipated minimal care, perhaps enough to keep me alive for interrogation, then neglect leading to infection and death. Instead, American medical personnel treated my burns with a drug called penicillin, changed my dressings daily with clean bandages, and provided morphine for pain management. The medical supplies used on me, an enemy soldier, exceeded what our entire tank company had available for all casualties. When I asked a Japanese-speaking medical corpsman why they would waste such precious resources on prisoners, he seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. All wounded deserve proper medical care, he said, as if this was self-evident rather than extraordinary. This simple statement revealed a philosophical difference more significant than any tactical disparity. The contrast in casualty evacuation procedures proved equally stark. American armored units operated with dedicated medical evacuation teams using tracked ambulances that could navigate the same terrain as combat vehicles. Wounded crews received treatment within minutes of being evacuated from disabled vehicles. Japanese tank units relied on whatever transport was available, often requiring wounded personnel to wait hours before evacuation to aid stations that frequently lacked basic medical supplies. Captain Hiroshi Nakamura described observing American casualty procedures after his capture. I watched an M18 Hellcat take a hit from one of our 47mm anti-tank guns. The round penetrated the thin armor, disabling the vehicle and wounding 2 crew members. Within 6 minutes, a tracked medical vehicle arrived, extracted the wounded, and provided immediate treatment. Within 15 minutes, the casualties had reached a forward aid station for surgical intervention. The disabled Hellcat was recovered by a specialized tank retriever within an hour. This entire system, the medical evacuation, the recovery vehicle, the forward surgical capability, operated with mechanical efficiency. In our forces, wounded tank crews might wait hours for evacuation. Disabled tanks often remained in place for days, sometimes weeks, awaiting recovery. The Americans treated both their personnel and their equipment as valuable assets worthy of immediate recovery. We had been taught to view both as expendable in service to larger objectives. As months passed and more Japanese tank personnel entered American custody, informal networks of information exchange developed among prisoners. Those who had been captured earlier shared their observations with newly arrived prisoners, creating a collective understanding of the gap between Japanese expectations and American capabilities. This prisoner community became its own form of counterintelligence, systematically documenting the failures of official Japanese assessments. Lieutenant Kenji Watanabe described participating in these discussions at the prisoner compound on Leyte. We gathered in small groups during evening hours, comparing experiences and observations. Each of us had believed our individual defeats resulted from bad luck, tactical errors, or local circumstances. Through these conversations, we recognized patterns. Every tank commander had been taught the same false assessments about American capabilities. Every unit had experienced the same tactical surprises when doctrine failed to match reality. These discussions were not formal, not organized, but they served a crucial psychological function. We were processing collective trauma, the trauma of discovering that our leaders had sent us into combat with systematically false information. This was not simple military defeat, which we could accept with honor. This was betrayal through incompetence or deliberate deception. The prisoners' growing awareness extended beyond tactical matters to broader strategic questions. As they received news about the war's progression through controlled information provided by American authorities, Japanese tank personnel began recognizing that their battlefield experiences reflected larger patterns of institutional failure. The same optimistic assessments that had proven false regarding American armor appeared equally false regarding overall war progress. Sergeant Takeshi Yamamoto, whose opening experience began this narrative, described his evolution in understanding through his journal entries. His first entry after capture focused narrowly on tactical surprise. His entries from 3 months later demonstrated broader strategic awareness. Today we received news that American forces have landed on Okinawa. The official Japanese communique claims great victories, successful counterattacks, heavy American casualties. None of us believe these reports anymore. We have learned that official assessments bear no relation to battlefield reality. If they lied to us about American tanks, about American logistics, about American tactical capabilities, why would their strategic assessments be any more accurate? We sit in this prisoner compound, well-fed and adequately treated, while our countrymen fight battles they cannot win with equipment that cannot compete, following tactical doctrine that does not work, sustained by assurances that are demonstrably false. This knowledge is its own form of torture. The transformation of Japanese tank personnel from confident warriors to disillusioned prisoners created opportunities that American psychological warfare specialists were quick to exploit. Captured tank crews who acknowledged the futility of continued resistance were offered opportunities to broadcast messages to their former comrades, encouraging surrender by describing their humane treatment and the impossibility of Japanese victory. These broadcasts proved remarkably effective, not because they offered political arguments, but because they provided specific technical details that active-duty tank crews could verify through their own observations. When former Sergeant Hideaki Sato broadcast descriptions of M18 Hellcat capabilities, Japanese tank commanders listening to these broadcasts could compare his statements to their own combat experiences. When he described American logistical capacity and prisoner rations, active-duty crews struggling with inadequate supplies recognized the truth in his words. The long-term impact of this psychological transformation extended far beyond immediate tactical consequences. After Japan's surrender in August 1945, many former tank personnel became influential voices in rebuilding Japanese society and particularly in reshaping Japanese self-defense force doctrine during the 1950s. Their wartime experiences had taught them harsh lessons about institutional honesty, the importance of realistic assessment of enemy capabilities, and the dangers of allowing cultural assumptions to override empirical evidence. Colonel Takeshi Yamamoto, the former sergeant whose shock at encountering the M18 Hellcat began our story, rose through the post-war Japanese self-defense force to become a senior armor doctrine instructor. His teaching methodology deliberately incorporated lessons from his wartime disillusionment. In a 1958 lecture to Japanese armor officers, he explicitly referenced his wartime experience. I stand before you as someone who learned through catastrophic defeat the cost of false assumptions. We were taught that American tankers were poorly trained, that American armor was slow and predictable, that superior Japanese warrior spirit would overcome material disadvantages. Every one of these assessments proved false when confronted with battlefield reality. The institutional failure that sent us into combat with systematically incorrect intelligence must never be repeated. Our doctrine must be built on honest assessment of both our capabilities and potential adversaries' capabilities, even when that assessment is uncomfortable or contradicts our preferences. This emphasis on realistic assessment became a cornerstone of post-war Japanese military education. Former tank commanders who had experienced the shock of discovering American M18 Hellcat capabilities became advocates for doctrine based on empirical evidence rather than cultural assumptions. They pushed for intelligence systems that rewarded accurate reporting rather than optimistic assessments. They insisted on training that prepared personnel for enemies who would not conform to Japanese expectations. The technical lessons were equally significant. Japanese engineers who studied captured American armored vehicles, including several former tank crew members who pursued engineering education after the war, recognized that American success reflected not just industrial capacity but fundamentally different design philosophies. The M18 Hellcat's combination of speed and firepower demonstrated that aggressive, offense-oriented doctrine required vehicles designed for rapid maneuver rather than defensive positioning. These insights influenced post-war Japanese armored vehicle development. When Japan began producing its own tanks for the self-defense force in the 1960s, designers explicitly incorporated lessons about power-to-weight ratios, suspension systems, and maintenance accessibility that had been observed in American vehicles during the war. The Type 61 medium tank, Japan's first post-war indigenous tank design, reflected clear influence from American engineering approaches, particularly in its emphasis on mobility and mechanical reliability. Perhaps most significantly, the experience of Japanese tank crews confronting American M18 Hellcats contributed to broader cultural reconsideration of how Japan had approached the Pacific War. The systematic gap between official assessments and battlefield reality in armored warfare mirrored similar gaps in naval warfare, air combat, and strategic planning. Tank crews' recognition that they had been systematically misled about American capabilities paralleled similar recognitions among naval officers, pilots, and infantry commanders. This collective acknowledgement that institutional dishonesty had contributed to Japan's defeat influenced post-war Japanese society in profound ways. The concept of facing facts honestly, even when those facts contradicted preferred narratives, became a touchstone for post-war reconstruction. Former military personnel who had experienced the consequences of institutional deception became advocates for transparency and empirical honesty in both government and private enterprise. 70 years after Sergeant Yamamoto's shocked encounter with American armor that moved faster than his training said was possible, the lessons of that moment continue resonating. The Japanese tank crews who discovered that everything they had been taught about their enemy was wrong experienced a trauma that transcended military defeat. They had prepared carefully, trained diligently, and fought courageously, only to discover that their preparation was built on false foundations, their training was based on incorrect premises, and their courage was expended in tactically hopeless situations. Yet from this trauma came important insights about institutional honesty, the dangers of allowing cultural assumptions to override empirical evidence, and the necessity of realistic assessment even when reality contradicts comforting narratives. The M18 Hellcat, racing across Philippine valleys at speeds Japanese doctrines said were impossible, became more than an enemy weapon. It became a symbol of the cost of systematic institutional deception and the importance of confronting uncomfortable truths. Lieutenant Kenji Watanabe's final diary entry, written in the prisoner compound on Leyte in July 1945, captures this legacy with remarkable clarity. I entered this war confident in our doctrine, our equipment, and our assessments of enemy capabilities. I survived by learning that confidence based on false premises is worse than uncertainty based on honest doubt. The Americans defeated us not primarily through superior courage or determination, qualities we possessed in equal measure. They defeated us through superior honesty. Their intelligence services provided accurate assessments even when those assessments revealed enemy strengths. Their doctrine adapted to battlefield realities rather than forcing realities to conform to doctrine. Their logistics prioritized what actually worked over what should theoretically work. These lessons, learned through bitter defeat and personal disillusionment, are perhaps the only valuable things I take from this war. May future generations learn them more cheaply than we did. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.